How do we get here? Those aren't the exact words we read in Exodus 32, but to me it seems like the heart of what Moses was thinking when he got back to the camp that day. See, he and the Israelites had been through a lot with God at this point. We're talking surviving plagues and escaping Egypt and crossing through this sea that was water and then dry land. And then God led them on this journey through the desert with a literal pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. And then, they thought they were going to die of thirst and hunger. And so he gives them water from a rock. And then he gives them their daily bread, like manna, this food, whatever it is coming down for them every day. If you haven't looked at the story of Exodus lately, or maybe ever, I encourage you to do so because it is like this wild, crazy ride. And time after time, God just keeps showing up and doing his thing. And he's providing exactly what his people need just in time when they need it. It's an epic story of God taking care of his people in style. And then we turn the page to Exodus chapter 32. And Moses is up on the mountain talking to God and getting kind of this playbook of how they're supposed to live life as a people in this new nation. And the next thing you know, the people are down in camp with Aaron, that brother that was supposed to be helping Moses lead. And all of a sudden they're saying, we're not sure. Who was Moses and where did he go? And it doesn't seem like he's coming back. So here, Aaron, make us a god. And so they give him their jewelry and he melts it down and he carves this golden calf. And they say, Israel, here are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt. And then they have a festival. They start doing sacrifices and offerings and basically this big old party worshiping this idol that they had created. And we just have to wonder a little bit, what was going on, right? So Moses is up on the mountain talking with God, and God's like, hey, those people down there, things are not going well. So Moses goes down, and he had some warning, but understandably, he was pretty angry when he really got there and saw exactly what was going on. And so he smashes those tablets God gave him. Again, he was pretty angry. But he goes to find his brother, and I just think the essence of that question is, how did we get here? And when I read that story, I keep thinking to myself, well, that escalated quickly, right? 1 minute we're this community that's faithfully following God and asking, and he's giving them what they need and everything. And then the next minute, it's a group of people who are denying him, who are making their own idol and saying, oh yeah, this calf, this is what brought us up out of those issues and years of slavery that we experienced. They were seeing the real God at work in their lives, and then all of a sudden they're turning to a man-made solution. How did we get here? And how did something that started so good turn so bad? How could you and I avoid making that same mistake? See, that's the question that Paul is addressing to the Corinthian church in our text tonight. If you are just joining us this semester, we've been going through the book of 1 Corinthians, and it is this letter to a young church that is growing and trying to figure out, what does it mean to faithfully follow God? In a lot of ways, they're kind of in the same position as the Israelites, who were trying to figure out what did it mean to be the people of God. So Paul's looking at them and he's saying, hey, you might have some similar struggles. So he starts out in chapter 10 telling them this little history lesson and pointing them back to what the Israelites went through, and he reminds them of this golden calf situation and a few other times. There are plenty of examples of how the Israelites would know God, but then turn to evil, turn to just completely rebel against God and the things he'd asked for them. And so in Corinthians chapter 10, we find Paul giving this warning to the church. He says, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us on who the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read this, I can't help but kind of picture my mom, hear her voice a little bit in that little sentence, be careful that you do not fall. Now, don't get too close. You're going to fall and break your neck. It's always the neck. I don't know what that's about, but right? So you hear that maybe a little bit? Well, this summer, I had the opportunity to travel to Utah with one of my friends, and we went to 5 of the national parks in Utah. And if you've never been, highly encourage you to go check it out. It's pretty awesome, especially if you like rocks. We've got a few pictures. It's a lot of rocks, but they are amazing. There's these arches and canyons and little things you can walk through, and those are called like hoodoos, and I don't even know. It's amazing. There's also really like steep drop-offs and things like that, and I don't know exactly what it is about the edge of something, but you just kind of want to walk out to, I'm not the only one that wants to walk out to the edge, right? Oh, go back for a second. So like day 3, this is my friend Leah, we are at Canyonlands National Park, which is not as cool as the Grand Canyon, but kind of a similar setup, right? So you're up driving and walking on the top, and you can see these like canyons and things that have been carved out by water. So she's sitting there. Okay, next picture. So that's me, and this is an area where there's like been a crater thing created, and I was trying to figure out how that happened and what it was. And so I walked down there. I don't know if you can really tell, but I'm on the edge, and there's kind of a lot of drop off down there. And as I'm walking down, I kind of go past this sweet Southern mama who was there with her teenage daughters. And as I go, I start to hear some of her comments that she's making about her concern over what I was doing. You see, she was Southern, so she was very sweet about it. But friends, she did not approve of my choice to walk down there to look into this canyon. And I tried to keep things light, like, oh, it's fine, and make some jokes about it, but there was nothing fine in her mind about what I was doing and how casually I was treating this situation. She didn't even know me, but her little mama's heart could not handle it that I was being kind of flippant about what she saw as pretty significant danger. And so in that moment, I turned around and walked back up because I didn't want to make her feel bad. But when I read this passage in 1 Corinthians, I can't help but feel like Paul is channeling that inner mom voice to us. He's not trying to cramp their style or be mean or anything. He's just speaking from this place of wisdom and experience. He has this better perspective that allows him to see that danger for what it is and see that it is all around, and that just like the Israelites, maybe this church is pretty unaware of the danger that they are just kind of playing around with, that they're pretty oblivious to. And he uses that example of the Israelites to show them the extent of what can happen, how serious this situation is. What danger exactly is Paul talking about? Well, in verse 13, he tells us, "No temptation has overtaken you except that what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." He's concerned that the church, he's concerned that you and I, just like the Israelites before us, might give in to temptation and find ourselves in a golden calf sort of situation, a how did we get here moment. It could be anything, It's easy for me to look at the story of the Israelites and kind of judge them pretty harshly and think, well, I would never do that, right? Like, I'd never fall into that kind of sin. I mean, come on, it's like a little gold statue. That's silly. But you have to think about it. Like, the place they come from, that was all they knew. That was what that culture that the Egyptians, that they'd been living with, that's what they were taught by everyone around them. So there's some precedence for why this was an area of temptation for them. But the second thing is, I think, well, I would never question God if I'd seen him in action the way they did. But let's think about this situation again. Well, how did they get there? It says that they went from believing to denying God when Moses was away. Their leader had left them. So maybe that played into it. Maybe they started, questioning because their faith wasn't strong enough on their own. And maybe it was just because he was away longer than they thought he should be, and that can kind of wear on our patience. I don't know which factor it was. Maybe it was just that impatience. Is he ever coming back? Or maybe they allowed doubts to start creeping in, like, does God really care for us? Is Moses really a leader? Did God really want him? Maybe Moses is wrong and we weren't supposed to be here. Maybe they just became bored. Like, at least back in Egypt, we had some cool parties to go to, but this is boring and we're sitting in the desert. I don't know. Maybe they grew arrogant and they stopped seeing God for the one who was providing for them and started kind of taking, well, we got ourselves out of Egypt. I don't know what it was exactly, which temptation, which path led them to this sin. Maybe it was just a combination of all of those. But when I start to think about it this way, I can see that though my sin struggle, my temptation might not be to bow down in a calf, those same paths are a pretty real danger for me. And they were for the church in Corinth too. See, the bottom line is the Israelites, they had experienced God and they had that firsthand knowledge of who he was, but they believed the lies of the enemy. And they rejected that truth that they had seen and experienced. And there they were, falling into sin again. And when we think about it that way, Paul's warning, it kind of seems pretty valid. It seems like his mom voice was maybe deserved there. Maybe we really do need to see this sin problem, this temptation problem around us for the danger that it is. Thankfully, Paul didn't just issue a warning, but in those words to the Corinthian church, he gave them a way to arrive at a different destination than the Israelites did. He gave us some simple steps of what it looks like to walk through temptation and succeed, to not fall into it. And the first one is really simple. If you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to man. The first thing he's saying is just be aware. He's saying, hey, temptation is going to happen to you. There is a real danger. We have to acknowledge that if we're going to be able to avoid it. We can't be dancing out on the side of a cliff and pretending that there's no danger there. We have to say, yes, we believe that we do have an enemy who's out to get us, who has some real strategies that he wants to use against us. I think of it this way. I'm not really a sports person, but I know some of you are. If I was going to play a game against someone that was my enemy, what would I do? Well, I'd want to know how do they work? What's their technique? And I know that whenever you're going up against another team, you take the time to figure out what are they good at? What are their weaknesses? How do I exploit them? Satan is definitely doing that to us, and we need to do it back to him. We need to know who our enemy is and know what he's like. The Bible gives us some really good descriptions of what to expect from him and what he's like. It also helps to kind of pay attention to how does he specifically attack me? How does he specifically attack other people? And we can see that through Scripture, and we can see it through our own life and the lives of the people around us. Now, this doesn't mean we want to become obsessed with Satan, and you can take that to an extreme, but it's just this healthy awareness of who our enemy is, and learning to recognize him so that whenever those lies, whenever those attacks come, we immediately know, hey, that's not God's voice. That's the voice of my enemy. The second thing Paul says is God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. See, after we acknowledge who our enemy is, Paul points us directly back to God and back to his truth and to the truth of his character. God is faithful. There's so many different truths about who God is, but those things, just like the Israelites, even though we've experienced them, we can easily get them confused, right? And that's one of Satan's favorite strategies. If you look all the way back to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, Satan, he's telling them lies about God, about who his character is and what God said. And so if we want to stand up to Satan, we need to know the truth of who God is. We also need to know the truth of who God says we are. And so if we want to walk forward in this, it's remembering God's truth about himself and about us. The final thing that Paul gives us as a step to take comes from that last verse. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so you can endure it. Paul doesn't say he'll sometimes provide a way out, or if it's really bad, God will give you an out, but otherwise you just have to figure it out. No, he says God will provide a way out every time. When I read this, I can't help but think okay, if God's giving me a way out, how do I keep falling into sin? How am I missing it? What's happening? And when I think about that, I think this scenario comes to mind. I think this Geico commercial really kind of encapsulates that moment for me. Yeah, it has nothing to do with Geico, but man, have you been in that scenario before? There's a way out. There is a running car, but we're getting behind the chainsaw. What are we doing? I don't know if you're one of those people who yells at the TV when people are doing dumb things, but come on. No, seriously. In every scenario, in every situation where I'm facing temptation, God has a getaway car for me. Every time? That's what it says here in 1 Corinthians, that it is there. So the question is, how am I missing it? Is it because I'm just saying no? I just want to walk into this danger. I just want to accept this sin because it's my way. Maybe. Is it because I'm listening to my really dumb friends who are like, let's go, right? Maybe. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons that we give into temptation, but this verse says that God provides a way out. So we got to be looking for it. We've got to be asking God to show us his way out because it's there and he wants us to have that. So when we look at this trajectory Paul has given us, it's pretty simple, right? It's this way to end up in a different place than the people before us, a different place than we've ended up before. But it's easy to say, and maybe obviously a little harder to do because we've all been there. We've all ended up in that place of giving into temptation, right? Well, God has given us some tools that we can use to be strengthened, to be able to walk this path that Paul's laid out a little bit better. And we read about them in the book of Ephesians in chapter 6. It talks about the armor of God. Maybe you've heard of that. Ephesians 6:13 says, "Therefore put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything to stand." And that whole passage is really good, but it just talks about these different pieces of armor, ways to defend ourselves that God's given us, the sword of the Spirit, the helmet of salvation, all of these things that we can use as tools to know our enemy and defend against his attacks, to protect against hearing lies about who God is and who we are, to see the way out that God has provided us, and to be able to run to that instead of following our own desires or the pressures of the people around us. These are tools that we not only maybe have experienced, but we can continue to grow in them. If you're wanting to be able to avoid temptation or be able to end up in that different place, I'd encourage you to dig into these. Every week in your bulletin, we provide something we call further study, and there's different verses and things you can look at throughout the week. Well, this week, those are all focused specifically on exploring what does this armor of God look like? What does this mean? And so if this is something you're like, man, I haven't really dug into that, I think that maybe I need to have a better understanding of how I can use the shield of faith to protect myself. I just invite you this week, dig into those. One of them, all of them, whatever it might be. And I believe that if you ask God to provide a deeper understanding and a better way to use those, he will do that. So I invite you to do that if you want to be able to walk this path well. You know, when I think about all this, I can't help but think of something that happened to me this weekend. This past weekend, I just got to visit some friends in Colorado, and we went to church Sunday morning. It was really cool, and then we drove out to this little spot called Lookout Mountain. It was just outside Denver, and as I always do when I'm out in nature and looking at things, I like to find the cool rock and go climb up on it because, you know, the picture. So I see this rock, and I head out there, and y'all, it was not actually really any more dangerous than any of those other spots I climbed on this summer. It wasn't, you know, any more risky or close to the edge. But there was one difference that I noticed pretty quickly: the shoes I was wearing. See, I was wearing these heeled, like, booties that I wore to church, not my Chacos. And they weren't that big of a heel, but it was a good amount, and I've never gone climbing on rocks in heels. I don't intend to again, because it's not a super stable experience. I'll just tell you that. When I think about this picture, okay, A, kind of crazy, sorry about that, but B, I think it's a picture of what Paul's biggest warning is here. He's saying, check what you're standing on. He's not saying avoid temptation, right? That's what you would think of, like, get off that rock, Molly. Get away from that temptation. Stay away from the enemy. Hide where he can't find you. That's not what he's saying. What Paul's saying when he says, if you think you are standing firm, be careful you do not fall. He's saying, what is between you and the danger? Are you standing on your own strength? Are you relying on your own ability? Are you looking at it as though you got to where you are, you're good with God because of you? Or are you relying on Christ? See, if we try to go up against Satan, if we try to face temptation from our own strength, it's as ridiculous as me on that rock standing on one foot on a heel. It's silly. It's crazy. It's hard, actually. And I will fall. We will fall if we're standing on our own ability. But we don't have to do that. See, God knew that we couldn't overcome sin on our own, so he gave us something better. He gave us Jesus. In Hebrews 4:14 through 16, we hear this description of Jesus. It says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may have mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. See, God knew, just like those Israelites, our sin problem we couldn't fix on our own. So he sent us a way out. He sent us his son, who did stand up to temptation, who did take our punishment, who died in our place and rose again, who serves as our representative to God. He's the reason we can stand in confidence. Jesus. That's the only reason. Now, I know in a group like this, you're coming in from a lot of different places. You're standing and sitting in a lot of different places tonight in relationship with God. And for each of you, there's something that I think God has to talk to you about tonight. And I don't know what all those things are. Maybe some of you are here tonight and you haven't taken that first step to say, I want that way out that Jesus provided. You aren't sure if you even believe all this stuff I'm talking about. And you know what? That's okay if you have questions. We would love to talk to you about them. Maybe the question God wants you to consider tonight is, what if this stuff about Jesus is true? What if grace is real? What if there really is a way out and a way to have relationship with God? Again, we'd love to talk to you if that's where you're at. And I just want to say, I believe that God cares about you and wants to have a relationship with you, and that's why he sent Jesus. And probably some of you are here tonight, you're living in what I kind of consider that like Israelite or 1 Corinthian like pre-golden calf sort of situation. You're following God and you're trying to do that faithfully every day. But the question maybe for you tonight is, are you aware of the danger? And what are you standing on? Are you standing on yourself or on God? And finally, maybe there's some of you here tonight who've been following Jesus, but lately your life, it actually just looks like that scene that Moses walked down into. That sort of golden calf moment where we're bowing down and like just completely indulging in sin. Maybe one sin or lots of different kinds of sin. Maybe that's where your life is tonight, and you're kind of sitting there asking yourself, how did I get here? And that's a fair question, but can I offer a different one? Who am I going to turn to? Maybe that's the question you need to be asking tonight. See, in Jesus, there's a way out for all of us. No matter how far we've fallen or how many times we've turned away, how deep we're in, Jesus, he's the only way out of our sin problem. He's the place we can stand firm. Like I said, tonight we want to give you this opportunity to just continue or start a conversation with God about where you're standing. There's a lot of different ways we could do that, so we've got a couple different options for you tonight. One thing is we have some reflection questions, and in just a few minutes, those are going to be coming around, and there's several different questions. You don't have to go through all of them or in any order, so I invite you, if you're looking at those, to just flip through and see which one do you need to spend some time thinking about tonight. There's different verses you can read as you reflect. Maybe some of you are in a place where you really just need to express something to God. Maybe you need to write out a prayer or draw, or however you express and communicate with God, write out a confession. Whatever that might be, we have just some blank paper and markers over on the side of the room, so you can feel free to grab those and express and communicate with God in that way. Maybe some of you really need to talk with someone and pray with someone, and our CCH staff's going to be in the back, and we would be more than happy to do that with you tonight. As we go into this time, I just want you to feel freedom to move, to spread out in this big room, to sit where you are, to stand, whatever it might be. This is a time for you and God. So maybe that's writing, maybe that's drawing, maybe that's praying, maybe that's through song. I don't know what it is, but please don't let this time go by without giving God the opportunity to speak and listening to what he has to say to you tonight. We're going to spend just a few minutes getting started on this, and there'll be some music as we do that. And then after a time of that, the band will lead a few more songs. But this whole time is for you to respond and reflect on what God's teaching you tonight. So please use that.